paper by Benoit. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a seriously dense, multi-layered academic paper by Benoit Lapierre. And let me tell you, it describes something absolutely fascinating. We'll be looking at this wild experiment that takes highly speculative, abstract philosophical concepts and literally drags them kicking and screaming into the physical world. I'm going to guide you through this source material step by step, stripping away all that heavy academic jargon so we can look directly at the groundbreaking ideas underneath. So, imagine taking a massive, highly complex philosophical framework, the kind you usually only find buried in dusty university dissertations, and physically building it into an off-grid mansion in Sierra Leone. It's crazy, right? But that begs the central question of this entire text. What actually happens when a philosophical theory becomes a 3,400 square foot house? Lapierre argues that this isn't just a building. It's a place where the theoretical map and the material territory have completely collapsed into one another. The philosophy literally keeps the lights on and the water running. To help us navigate this esoteric source material without getting lost, we've got a simple 5-part agenda. First, we'll look at how theory becomes a house. Second, words as living organs. Third, joyful learning and flat guilds. Fourth, metabolizing failure and decay. And finally, a new post-colonial success. Let's get into it. Section 1. Theory becomes a house. The delta T-squared complex in Kinema district. Right off the bat, the author introduces us to the kenemagorian hyperorganon. Now, I know that sounds like a piece of sci-fi technology, but it's essentially a living ecosystem. The architecture, the tools the workers use, and even the daily family routines are physical organs of the theory itself. The author stresses that this framework has completely ceased to be mere speculation. It's a living ontology. Basically meaning the philosophy isn't just thought about, it's physically lived inside of. The house is like a multi-organic body, where the walls act as membranes of security, and even the storage rooms are this physical exercise in temporal sovereignty. And the heartbeat of this house is what the text calls the delta T-squared model. It's a 4-step rotation. It kicks off with ultra, which is the ignition of faith or a shared vision. From there, that vision extends outward to extra, engaging with the public or the broader market. Then it moves into meta, where the community reflects and orders the concept. And finally, it lands at intra. This is where that abstract faith translates all the way down into the literal physical fatigue and breath of the human body. Because in this system, every vision absolutely must become embodied proof. Now, what's really interesting here is that this model isn't just some closed mathematical loop. It's a breathing, open system kept alive by the sensory reality of the West African environment. The source text points out that if this were a closed loop, it would just stagnate. Instead, it's fueled by the physical friction of handiwork, literally the feeling of a tool in a calloused hand. And it has to adapt to totally unpredictable variables like rain smell, dust, and humidity. So the environment is out there actively stress testing the philosophy every single day. Moving on to Section 2, words as living organs, the physical weight of language. In standard academia, language is usually just a transparent window you look through to see a concept. But in this paradigm, words aren't just academic labels, they are the actual tissue of the concept itself. Take the word stamina org, for example. Saying this word actually creates an internal physical pathway to help a worker endure heat and exhaustion. It weaves stamina and organ together so that uttering it enacts a bodily sense of endurance. It's a linguistic tool doing literal heavy lifting out in the sun. And this brilliantly illustrates how terms like pulmolung act as functional somatic organs. Pulmolung refers to the breath infrastructure of the group. But here's what's amazing. How do they verify if this word is actually working? Well, they don't use external data monitors or smartwatches, that's for sure. Verification is found in the shared resonant breathing of the workers swinging their tools out in the courtyard. If the word helps them synchronize their respiration rates and labor effectively, boom, the word's function is validated. Next up, Section 3, joyful learning and flat guilds, bypassing managerial hierarchy. There is a really sharp contrast here when it comes to education. Unlike traditional schooling, which the text argues relies on abstract, acidic instruction that mimics colonial violence, the children here learn through something called play Lesota. This is a joyful, sensory, deeply grounded pedagogy. The kids absorb this massive philosophical framework not by sitting quietly at desks, but by digging in the soil, smelling the earth, and singing with their elders. The learning is totally kinetic and whole body. The idea is that knowing how to do something comes first. Knowing that it's a formal philosophical concept comes much later. As for the adults, Governance and labor happen through flat guilds, which the text calls guild rhizome. It's a purely horizontal labor network. There are zero permanent bosses or vertical administrators here. Authority is strictly functional. Say a water system needs repairing, authority flows temporarily right to the person with the most acute skill for that specific task. And the very moment the repair is finished, their authority completely dissolves back into the community. It's an anti-hierarchy that actively prevents any structural domination.
Section 4. Metabolizing failure and decay. Turning systemic malfunction into fuel.
I absolutely love the perspective captured by the author here when they write that failure is not the opposite of success, but its nutrient. The text notes that failure is viewed as a metabolic interruption, just a temporary dysrhythmia. When a crisis hits, the community doesn't panic or seek to punish anyone. They immediately enfold the failure in care. They view the entire process of living as continuous ecological maintenance. Basically, they treat the end of a tool's life or a system's breakdown as a natural, almost sacred part of the rotation. Decay is just part of the deal. The author breaks failure down into 3 distinct registers. First, there's sin, which is a moral failure or a rupture in their covenant, like pride or cruelty. Then there's error, which is simply a miscalculated plan. And finally, systemic malfunction, like when a water pump literally just gives out and stops working. But here's the absolute genius of the hyperorganon. The response to all 3 is identical. There is no scapegoating or finger-pointing. The response is collective inquiry, recalibration, and repair as worship to get the system's circulation flowing again. Finally, Section 5. A new post-colonial success. Rooting into the local soil. This philosophy draws a really sharp contrast between 2 distinct futuristic visions. On one side, you have standard Western accelerationism, which kind of wants to escape physical reality altogether, right? Fleeing into the digital metaverse or blasting off to Mars, always seeking these grand, universal solutions. But on the flip side, the hyperorganon practices what the author calls indigenous accelerationism. It accelerates directly into the dirt. It succeeds precisely because it refuses to be a universal blueprint. It is unapologetically specific, serving only the distinct dust composition and rain patterns of Kenema. So how do they actually define success? Well, success for the hyperorganon is definitely not about gaining a stamp of approval from a university, some Western development agency, or an NGO. It's defined entirely by operationality. Can this system sustain dignity? Does it facilitate intergenerational care and joy? Does it functionally survive off the grid without relying on state validation? Success here is simply the continuous, independent maintenance of a joyful life system that confidently writes its own rules. There's a quote from the text that perfectly captures the heart of this entire explainer. The world is not conquered force, it is kept alive through covenantal repair. That is so powerful. True, lasting sovereignty isn't found in dominating nature or dominating other people, and it certainly isn't found in building a perfect, unbroken system. Sovereignty is found in the humble, disciplined, daily act of repairing what naturally breaks down. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought about the structures in your own life. Is your world conquered by force or kept alive through repair? How do you treat the inevitable failures in your own hyperorganon? I highly encourage you to go read Benoit Nounier-Lapierre's original text to discover even more about how these deeply grounded, beautifully complex concepts might take root in your own daily routines. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.